if they don't feel safe to open up to you, they're not going to talk to you. So I think really this is a great example of why we can't just double down on one. We have to really explore all of them and what's needed at what time in the conversation. So if we're rushing through our building the container, as we say in coaching, if we're rushing through that, then we're not going to be able to have those conversations, of mindset and values that resonate to really create that change, that transformation, that growth that we really are here as coaches to do.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Jennifer Britton, and welcome to the CoachingMany Podcast. I've been on a mission for the last 20 years to expand the coaching conversation to many. Along with my co-host, Evana Valley, we're going to be exploring coaching as it relates to conversations, connection, and change in both personal and professional settings. CoachingMany is about creating empowering and thought-provoking spaces for conversation which strengthen relationships and enhance results. Throughout the CoachingMany podcast, we'll share tools, practices, and approaches to support you in your conversations, one dialogue at a time. So, Evana, we're continuing on our journey of the superpowers for group and team coaches. We recently talked all about the first superpower, and today we're moving into the Spiral Lighthouse superpower. Now, I know this is one of your superpowers. Why don't you take a moment and share with us what the Spiral Lighthouse is all about?
Sure. The Spiral Lighthouse is really about that harbor, that trust, safety, and connection, that foundation, which I think as in a CoachingMany or even one-on-one or even around your kitchen table is fundamental to be able to have that space for people to feel that trust, that they can open up, that safety. That for me, that's part of the nervous system work. How do we do that with the nervous system of safety? And then that connection, that dialogue. And so that's a big part of this, is creating that space for deeper conversations, more intimate conversations. So that's one layer, which, speaking of Spiral Lighthouses do well with layers or perspective. So if you think about even the visual of the Spiral Lighthouse, as you climb the lighthouse, you're going to see different layers or different perspectives of the view of the landscape of what you're doing. And as a coach, we obviously know that all coach training, basic training, really talks about perspectives and how can we help people see things differently. And that's actually something that I integrate in my work. So there's that piece. And then I think it's also a fundamental part, which is part of your intellectual property, is the waterline, that view of what is below the waterline. So those assumptions, the mindset, the values. So because those are the things that are below the surface, which will then, in exploring those and helping people to explore those, will then have the behavior change, which will then have the results that people are ultimately wanting in their life. So this is one of the superpowers. And this is where I think it's really important that we acknowledge that this is one of 5. It doesn't mean we anchor in this one. So if you relate to this, like I relate to this, this is my strong superpower, but there's more to being an effective group and team and coach, parent, child than just staying here.
Yeah. And I think that's the key is, coaching in today's world requires that we grow in all areas. And part of our intent here in breaking it down into these 5 areas is to just show the flavor, right? We always lead from something, but it doesn't mean that we just lead from that. In fact, the diversity and the distinctions in the room means that different people will connect with different ideas, different types of questions, different activities. And to the Spiral Lighthouse that is so good at creating that trust, safety, and connection and working around perspectives, they're also really good at getting people to look at a 360-degree view. So imagine taking people up to the top of the lighthouse or a fire tower where you would actually be able to see the landscape around and get that bird's eye view of what really is happening, not just in a part window, but really in that 360 view. And so that in today's world also can be a really valuable perspective experience to really see like what is really happening. Because when we're on the ground, we may not see everything in full spectrum or in that 360 view. So with this in mind, we're going to spend a little bit of time today looking at sort of what are the types of activities, how, if this is one of your strengths or, the go-tos, how might you even grow your business? Because I think it is important to work with our strengths, even though as a coach, we want to show up with all of the compliments or partner with others, right? So there is an option too of co-coaching with people who have a different superpower than you. So for me, again, catalytic firecracker or the creative tool master would probably be the top two that I lead from usually. But the stretch always has been the grounded labyrinth. So partnering with people who are more of that grounded labyrinth energy so that when I'm working with a team, especially, we can bring that energy together so that the team has all of the sort of the whole landscape of the superpowers. And the one I haven't mentioned in the last few minutes is, of course, the ecosystem connector. And I think those of you who are ecosystem connectors, you're always listening for the connectivity, for the look at the systemic angle of things as well, which we know is so important in today's landscape. So let's dive in. Again, today's episode, we're going to dive into the Spiral Lighthouse. Thanks, Evana, for giving us that overview. And maybe we start with activities or things that we do. Like, what does it look like? What's one thing you might lean into as a Spiral Lighthouse coach to help a group client, right? A group set of clients go from A to B. Like, where do you start the conversation with them? You talked about perspectives, but what else would you do?
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of a group client, I think a big part of a good starting point when we're talking about tools is vision. I know this is a really, really big part. You've done a lot of different training and certification, but really anchoring people, especially with the work that I do and people in transition or people who are evolving, oftentimes they can be, I'm going to say, stuck in the muck. And so supporting them to using that 360 view and also being sensitive of thinking of that trust and safety, but how can we support them in creating that vision, but also staying in that safety zone so it's not too far out of it's in their growth zone, not much further than that. So that's one thing that I often will do. And I often start with vision. And it could just even be like the vision of whether it be about their life, like the vision of what is possible through this group coaching program. So it's actually more practical, depending on, again, this is where we need to know our clients and where they're at and support them. But that is a great tool that I lean in is vision.
Yeah. And for those that are listening in, right, like so many different tools at our disposal with vision, whether we're taking people through a future self exercise, whether we're looking at asking questions, whether we're having people create one, design one, collage one, the possibilities are endless. But there's a couple of things that happen when we actually put people into vision. Number one, we activate the reticular articulating system. That's part of our brain that starts to help us sort the stimuli that comes in through what we're seeing in the visual channel. So that means that we start seeing certain things that we're focusing on. So there is a science. It's not just like, oh, every red car is now showing up or whatever we're looking for. It's actually part of the brain function of sorting. So with looking at that, we want to really think about what are the ways that we activate vision. Because as Evana said, it helps us get out of the muck. It helps us also really lean into possibility, the field of possibility. Yeah. So we've talked a lot also on the podcast about the wonderful writing and work and research led by Richard Boyatzis, activating the PEA, right? That positive emotional attractor network to also open up the brain for possibilities. And so Spiral Lighthouse, how do we get to the top of the tower, right? I think that's really the big question of how do we help people get into the landscape of vision and what's possible. All right, so that's one of many possibilities. What's another one? Anything else? Like what comes to my mind? You said it earlier, perspectives work, because that's a
Yeah.
huge bucket of exploration and layers of what is the perspective you're standing in.
Mhm.
What comes to
Yeah.
mind when you think about perspectives?
Well, even I'm going to bring it back to there's a great tool. It's called Vision Chairs. So it actually helps people connect to their vision, but also vision. What is the vision? But then vision without change. So that's a perspective versus vision with change. Right. And so there's that. And even I'm thinking about going back to the CTI work that we did, right? We did I think it was balance was all about perspectives and bringing like, how can I see this differently? And although it's a how question, I think that specific question really supports people. Oh, yeah, like there is a different way that I can look at the situation. I was just with a client an hour ago and we were going through some sticky stuff. And it was really around, okay, well, yes, this is the circumstance, but if we take a few steps back, that 360 view, like what else is here? What else are we noticing? And so I think perspective work really is just inviting the space, even in groups. I'm thinking even in groups is even like we're observing what's being activated in the conversation. So although Jennifer might be speaking, there could be an activation going on here that could invite another perspective into the dialogue. And I think this is part of that from a Spiral Lighthouse standpoint. We're watching for even the activations in the room to allow different participants to bring their voice in that might activate a different perspective, or maybe what was just said activates for someone else. So I think just even the space in the group dialogue just naturally lends to this. If we as the coach are listening, not only in the words, but in what's not being said, in the energy and the body shifts, this can naturally
Mhm.
begin to happen as a coach.
Yeah. And again, notice layers, right? Body, mind, perspectives. There's
Right.
just so much that is happening. And it is a journey, right? It's a journey up and down the staircase. I think, one of the favorite statements that was shared by a coach going through our Activate the Group and Team Coaching Superpowers program about a year ago, when I was asking, like, what questions do you ask from this superpower?
Mhm.
They were saying, well, they like to explore with their client at what part of the spiral are they at? Are they at the top?
Mm.
Are they at the midpoint? Are they at the bottom? Are they going up? Are they going down? Like, there's just so many layers of the journey that you can also be
Yeah.
exploring. And so I think that's a wonderful metaphor. It's not a fixed position, it's a journey. You're constantly in movement.
Beautiful.
Whether it's an upwards, downwards, or that 360 notion as well. So, Spiral Lighthouse, let's talk a little bit. There's some ways that we might coach around it, but if this is your preference, if this is how you really see and operate in the world, what about building a business? Because I think it's just as important for coaches to actually have business as it is to have the conversation. And
Mm.
so, what do you think Spiral Lighthouse coaches lean into when they're growing their business? What approaches might they gravitate to? This could be a stretch, but what's your gut saying on this one?
I think for me, I think in terms of even inviting conversations, so to invite other perspectives, even collaborations, maybe I'm dipping a little bit into the ecosystem connector,
Mhm.
but I think there's also that here. If I look back at my work and the evolution of my work as a coach, I've done a lot of collaborations, you
Mhm.
know, and that's been both from a business standpoint, but even from a marketing standpoint, in inviting people into the conversation that will invite a bigger dialogue, right?
Yes.
I'm even thinking, even for me, when I was creating events in Italy, even like my method of attracting was through collaboration, but then I often had a webinar to create that
Mhm.
safety
Mhm.
and having dialogue around visuals and what activated in them in the visuals, because the visuals represented what the experience was going to offer.
Yeah.
And so people would activate that inside of them. And even through the other people sharing what they're received offered an expanded perspective, like, wow, I never thought of that. Oh yeah, I want that too. That type of sting, that type of engagement.
Yeah. And I think, again, like anything that's going to bring people together for that safety zone, right? That like, let's connect. Because if you think about a lighthouse, right? They were also meeting spaces in communities. They are still
Yeah.
meeting spaces. And so, how do you bring people together for multiple events, collaborative events, or community based events as
Hmm.
well? Um,
Yeah.
Again, I think this is where we want to leave the seed with you. You can have all of the five. So you don't
Yeah.
just have to be a Spiral Lighthouse, but what can you be doing to really get your message out? And what are those approaches? Because we continue to hear so much noise in the landscape
Yeah.
and the business, the industry of coaching, of like, you've got to be doing this, you've got to be doing that. But if something isn't aligned with a person's natural style, they're unlikely to continue to do it over time. And we know
Hmm.
in marketing, it used to be the 7 to 11 times rule. I think, during the pandemic, that went to the 35 times rule of a person needs to see, hear, experience a message multiple times. I'm not going to go into like what is the exact number in 2025, but just putting one thing out is not enough. So if we're going to be consistent, how are we doing it in a way that is really matching our style? And I'm hearing for you, Ivana, it really is about bringing people together. That's where the joy is, and that's where you're going to
Yeah.
keep doing it.
Yeah. I even thought, Jen, and this is just maybe to even spark dialogue. So I live in Italy, and part of my business is really working with Italian natives, developing their confidence, their strength, their groundedness, and their self-expression in English. And so
Mm-hmm.
part of that trust safety for me, and I'm actually acknowledging it as with based on what you said, is I often will start with a WhatsApp conversation, and that WhatsApp conversation is all in Italian, all in
Mm-hmm.
Italian.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that, I've actually added a step to that trust, safety, connection that I invite for a coffee. So oftentimes we'll meet
Mm-hmm.
if they're local.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
And then from there, oftentimes there's still not a word of English.
Yeah.
And the powerful thing is and I do this through modeling, is I'm speaking Italian, but I am not perfect in my Italian. And a lot of Italians come to me with that thing that they don't speak perfectly and they want to speak like I speak, but I'm modeling this and just saying, hey, like this is the journey. Like this is the
Mm-hmm.
action. The action is actually in the conversation. And so
Mm-hmm.
through that, I'm building that trust, that safety, and the connection through modeling, through meeting them where they're at, but
Yeah.
also showing them what's possible through the action. So
Nice.
it's really powerful. So I think as I say that, regardless of where you are, and even the visual, is that light, like that beam of light, like what is that beam of light for you, whether it be in your own programs or even in your marketing conversation, even in group coaching essentials. We talk about this in week 3 in terms of what is that metaphor. And oftentimes for me, it's that arrow with a heart,
Yeah.
because I want to lead with heart, but I'm also very focused. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
the Spiral Lighthouse does. The Spiral Lighthouse brings light, invites people to see beyond what they see.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You mentioned the arrow with the heart. I think I was sharing about the recent experience of bringing the charms into this keynote. And one person in the audience decided that they would go around and collect all the arrows with hearts and out of the 10 tables. So it made me laugh.
No
Really
way.
made me laugh. But yeah, I think, again, metaphors, right? How are we holding the space for metaphor as well? Again, we want to leave this notion of like, what is available to you here as a coach, right? How do you show up with your presence? How do you show up with your questions? What
Mhm.
is maybe possible for you and your clients when you can lean into this? Because there's so much available. The other piece that you had mentioned was just the below the waterline, right?
Yeah.
Which really
Yeah.
is the notion of the iceberg that I introduced in Coaching Business Builder and Plan, Do, Track. And it really is a whole framework in and of itself where coaches can be exploring on a systematic basis with their clients these different layers of perspectives and assumptions and belief systems. And I think the idea of a visual metaphor, which is why with the creation of this superpower framework, it just helps people remember things, right?
Mhm.
Structures help us activate memory and make sense of things. And that is really important in a world of change. Um, Tangent, but an important tangent, right? Like, I think we also want to look at these superpowers through the landscape of the evolution of work. And last week, I was, like so many other thousands of people, in meetings in Stockholm virtually on Wednesday and Thursday, looking at the inner development goals. So, what do we need to do in order to affect world change? And I think very much this notion of doing the inner work, doing the deep work to really help people
Yeah.
have the safety to really look at what's emerging is critical. And I was really lucky to listen to Otto Scharmer, who, if you've heard me, talk in supervision, or you've been with us in team coaching, Otto Scharmer and his whole body of work with Theory U and emergence and working with emergence is such a critical space. And so I think, again, if we look at the Spiral Lighthouse, there can also be this notion of emergence, especially when things are coming out of the fog or the light is cutting through the darkness, right? What are we seeing?
Totally.
What are we getting a hint of that might be on the horizon that isn't quite here yet? And how do we create that trust, safety, and connection for people to continue the journey or lean in and get curious around? I wonder what is going to be forming. Because in today's business world of AI, there is so much disruption in literally every industry. It's an interesting perspective. Do I just see it, again, because of my reticular articulating system? But I think it's becoming more commonplace at community levels, at global levels. Like, we're just seeing massive shifts. And so if this is your superpower, right, that may be another vehicle to hold space for people to really get grounded in times of radical change.
Yeah. I think it's really important, both in what we're seeing around the world, but also with what people are dealing with individually in personal transitions,
Mm-hmm.
professional transitions, layoffs, all this stuff. And I think when I think about Spiral Lighthouse and when I think about really the iceberg model, like that below the waterline is really that those access points to help people reconnect to who they are,
Mm-hmm.
their values, like, oh wow, like look at the assumption I'm making that actually is getting in the way of what I truly want, which then affects that behavior and those results that are above the waterline. So I think it absolutely is an internal journey, which then becomes an external
Results.
journey and
Mm-hmm.
results. And I think for the Spiral Lighthouse, I think it's really fundamental that this is that trust, safety, connection. I think this is why I really just adore these superpowers is we can't just be good in one. Like it's that range. Because I think a lot of even what we talk about in group coaching essentials, like the foundation of work, whether it be one-on-one in design alliance or whatever, or groups, is that trust, safety. Even with a one-on-one client, even your child, if they don't feel safe to open up to you, they're not going to talk to you. So I think
Yeah.
really this is a great example of why we can't just double down on one. We have to
Mm-hmm.
really explore all of them and what's needed in at what time in the conversation. So if we're rushing through our building the container, as we say in coaching, if we're rushing through that, then we're not going to be able to have those conversations, of
Mm-hmm.
mindset and values that resonate to really create that change, that transformation, that growth that we really are here as coaches to do.
Yeah. At any
It's
level,
to
right?
support at any level.
Yeah, and I think just as you said, like the path to mastery is about growing all capability in all five of these
Yeah.
areas. So we hope that we've wet your whistle with us, and I invite you, if you haven't taken the group and team coaching superpower quiz, head on over to bit.ly/GT coaching superpower. That's GT coaching superpower, bit.ly. And I think it's really just a fun 2-minute thing you can do on your phone. You'll have a little video that comes out at the end and a report that you can download. And just like we've talked about today, right? So many layers of this in terms of holding space for your groups, types of activities you might lead from, and then how you want to grow your business. That's another really, really important part of this. We do offer twice a year the Activate Your Group and Team Coaching Superpower program. We just wrapped that up actually last Friday, and I think people really enjoyed the 6-week journey, right? It's not just about doubling down into the one. It's about getting exposure to all so that we can continue to learn. And as we come into a new year, I think this is the invitation for everyone to think about, what is that growth edge for you? Where do you want to grow in the new year? Is it expanding your toolkit? Is it learning more about neuroscience? Is it doubling down on one of the competencies? Is it growing your business? What are the areas that are going to help you as a coach? Because what we experience does often show up in the work that we're doing with others. So I think that's a nice sort of end point. I don't know. Is there anything else you want to mention as we get to wrap this superpower up today?
No, I think it's that mindset. Just like go check out the quiz. And oftentimes I'll say this, like you have a primary and you have a secondary, but that's important to know. But I think what's most important to know is like, where's your stretch? Where's your growth? So it's good to be really, and this is what I really appreciate about the Activate courses. We spent time with each. So it's like, yeah, this is me. It's validating. It's reassuring. And then it's like, oh, wow. But as we learned and discover about others, and as the others who are in the program with you also go, yeah, this is me. It's like, oh, wow, like this is my growth. This is my stretch. And it goes back to core competencies, right? We're here to continue to grow and evolve. So I love this course because it really talks about who I am as a coach and where's my range. Yeah. And so we just like we're inviting our clients to grow, we as coaches need to continue growing. And this is a great program to really support some self-awareness, some action, and some accountability to move forward as a coach.
Especially if you are partnering, right? Being able to have this conversation with your partner is invaluable because our strengths and the blind spots get magnified when you're doing something with others. So we hope that you've enjoyed it today. As always, we will be back. We're going to do a couple of conversations with people who also might lead from the Spiral Lighthouse or maybe the Grounded Labyrinth or others. So you get to decide. And as always, we appreciate you subscribing, liking, and sharing within your network. Our work continues to grow primarily by word of mouth, and it has for 20 years. And in fact, 2026 will be our 20th anniversary at Group Coaching Essentials. So we hope that you'll join us for different celebrations as we continue our journey. So with that, have a great day. Thanks, Evana. And we'll look forward to seeing you here on the CoachingMany podcast again soon. Take care, everyone. Bye.